Baron Voodoo. This is an abstract game with a very thin voodoo theme on it. In truth, it is checkers with superpowers. During the game, you will collect game pieces using the same jumping mechanic having checkers, but then you also activate superpowers, and you're also trying to collect game pieces in sets that will score you more points. Again, ideally, you represent Loas that are fighting to become the biggest, baddest voodoo practitioner. After Baron Samedi, I guess the guy decided to retire after a while, and is looking for the next king of voodoo. The game plays with 2 to 4 players. It is a competitive game. Each player has a Loa represented by a Loa board, and each Loa has a unique power, which is also indicated by the icons that you see here. Each player also has a number of victory points that they will acquire during the game. There's a track here. You place a cube in there. As you acquire points, you move that cube. When somebody reaches a specific number of points, which depends on the number of players, say 18, 15, or 12 for 2, 3, or 4 players respectively, they trigger the end of the game. You keep playing until everybody has the same number of turns. Then there's a final scoring where people can cash in some extra sets where they score extra points for having the majority of cubes in a certain color. We'll see what that means. But basically, after the final scoring, the player with the highest score wins the game. Ultimately, you are after points. The board of the game is the one that you see here. You have these dice. I hesitate for a second to call them dice because you roll them only once during the game, during setup, so that, as you can see, there are different symbols, but which symbol will be up at the beginning of the game is randomly determined, and then you place them in the spaces corresponding to their color on the board. There are also other kinds of setup, but this is the standard setup. You roll them randomly, and then you place them without paying too much attention to where they go, with the exception of they need to go where there is a space of a matching color. Then players will alternate taking turns. At the beginning of your turn, you can use your Loa's power. Say, for example, what she does is she can push all of the cubes in a column or a line or to one side. For example, she could decide to do this. Would that be a good move? I don't know right now. I'm just explaining the power. Other people have other powers, such as to move a die within the same row and things like that. So you can use your own power for free. You will also collect offering tokens during the game. At the beginning of your turn, you can also spend an offering to activate the power of another Loa. And there's something that the rules don't state clearly. You can use all the powers of all 4 Loas in the game, even if they're not currently in play. So even if you're playing with 2 players, this is mine, that is yours, you can still use these 2 powers. It's one of the has several important points that the rulebook is kind of vague about. So at the beginning of your turn, you can, but don't have to use a Loa power. Yours for free, somebody else's by spending an offering. Then you take your main action, which is where the checkers element really comes into play. You must collect a die. Let's go back to the original setup. You must collect a die during this phase. Actually, if somebody cannot collect a die even after using possible Loa effects, then that also triggers the end of the game, but that hasn't happened to me yet. To collect a die, you can move a die of your own color. In this example, suppose I'm playing with yellow, so I take a yellow die and I collect another die by jumping over a die. I can jump into an empty space like so, and I collect the die that I jumped over. Or I could also jump into a space that is occupied by another die, in which case I simply sit on it and I again collect the die that I jumped over. And suppose that then later purple retaliates, and so they go there. Dice can be stacked into towers of up to 3 dice, so that means that I wouldn't be able to jump over another die and land over that die for example, right now. So what happens after I jump over a die and I collect a die, which may be my own color. Maybe that later as the dice move around, I jump over my own color and I collect one of my dice. So what happens? After you collect a die, it goes on your player board and it goes in this area here, the top area. Later, when you have certain sets, you can trade them for points, and when you do so, you move them in the bottom area of your player aid, which is called the Spirit World. But initially, they go here. Then, after you place your die there, you can do a number of optional actions. It's completely up to you. You can collect an offering if you did collect a die of your own color. After all, you kind of like limit your options, so you have that little consolation prize there. You can spend an offering to change the symbol of the die. You can also apply the effect of the capture die. And so, for example, this die here will give me an offering. This other die would load my protection token. Everybody has a token like this. It starts with that side face up. By using that effect, I load it and no one can mess with my dice. No one can try to steal them or move them around as other effects would allow me to do. This one simply gives me a victory point right away. I can steal a die. Where is it? Steal. There you go. Steal a die from an opponent's spirit world. I can switch a die from an opponent's area to that of another opponent, and I can be one of those. So I can do different things with these dice. Back to us. After you do these things, again, among your optional actions, you could spend 2 offerings to play another turn, but you can do it only once. You cannot keep doing that once per turn. And then you can also earn victory points by placing capture dice into your spirit world. And here you have a player aid, or what kind of sets generate what kind of points. So for example, if you have dice with the same symbol but different colors, then you can move them from your play area here to the spirit world. And they will give you 1 point for a set of 2, 3 points for a set of 3, 5 points for a set of 4. You can also do the same if you have dice of the same color showing different symbols. And so, for example, if I move this set here to the spirit world, it's a set of 3, and so that gives me 3 points. So these are your actions. At the end of the turn, if I did not use any lost power at the beginning of my personal turn, I can actually do it at the end. So summarizing, you can use lost powers, your own for free, somebody else's, by paying an offering at the beginning of your turn or at the end. You capture a die, possibly do stuff such as collecting offerings, spending offerings to change the facing, possibly use the ability, but sometimes maybe you just turn into a certain facing because you want to combine to create certain combos, possibly spend 2 offerings to take another turn. That won't happen very often in a game. And then again, possibly move sets of dice to your spirit world to collect points. This is how you play Baron Voodoo at the end of the game, which again is triggered when somebody can't move or when somebody reaches a certain number of points. At the end of the game and after the final scoring, the player with the most points wins the game. I realize now I forgot to tell you an important element of the game, which is the Baron himself. There is a token to represent the guy. The player with the majority of white dice in their spirit world gets to collect the token, and then they can use any of the lost powers for free, whereas usually you would need to spend an offering. The rulebook is not particularly clear about that. It says who has the majority, and that is to be taken literally. I had to ask the question online. Somebody answered, that is, if there is a tie, no one gets it. So a player has one die, they collect it, and when somebody else also has a die and tie with them, then Baron is is uncontrolled, goes back to the supply, and so on and so forth. And this is just one of the several blurry areas. The rulebook was not written in English originally. I think it has been translated, well, in a way just too vague. The language is not tight enough. There are places where the word isolated means a die that no one can capture because there's nothing adjacent to it. Other instances where the word isolated die simply means a die that is not part of a column. And that is not acceptable. In a game rulebook, we need to have language that is tighter. Other times the terms column, you imagine, it may mean a column on the board, it means a column of dice, and things like that. So the language is just a little sloppy, a little blurry. The game is pretty simple, but it just took me a little longer to learn it than I would have wanted for a game this simple. As for gameplay itself, well, before that, naturally, I'm going to praise the production because rulebook apart, language rulebook apart, the production is very nice. Those cubes, they look nice, they're pleasant to manipulate, to move around, to make little piles with. The art on those player aids is very nice, colorful, simple, but very effective. Cardboard aesthetic. I really like the production, the material production of the game. For gameplay, pluses and minuses. I like it enough. I like it okay. I don't dislike it, I can say that, but I don't think I'm totally in love with it. I played the game with 2 and 3 players, and both were my daughters. One time only with, several times only with the 10-year-old, and other times with the 10 and the 8-year-old. And again, same for them. They enjoyed it. They weren't disliking it while we were playing it, but as soon as they put it away, no one mentioned it again. No one felt like playing it again. With 3 players, the game is just too chaotic for my taste. I believe the game works better with 2 players, maybe as, you know, the original source checkers is supposed to work that way. Because with 3 players, it becomes totally impossible to predict what the board will look like next time. To plan ahead, people will use game effects to mess up your dice. They will remove your dice from the board. They will move them around and scatter them by using the lowest powers. They will cover them with other dice that sit on top of yours. Of course, when there's a column of dice, a pile of dice, a stalactite, stalagmite of dice, only the one on top matters. It's just completely chaotic. And so there's, again, you still have stuff to do, but then the problem becomes analysis paralysis. Now, playing with an 80-year-old, that's not that much of a problem, but just playing with a 10-year-old who actually knew what the heck she was doing, that was already a whole other range of situations. And then when I was playing, sometimes I would just perform a move that felt suboptimal because I felt guilty, because I realized that if I really was going to try to play as best as I could, then the game would have been a pain for everybody. It would have taken me so long. Again, especially because with more than 1 player, there's so much that I have to analyze. It's not like, well, during other player's turn, I'm going to think about what to do, because the player just before me messes up royally. The entire board changes everything. Functionally speaking, changes enough that I have to start my analysis from the beginning, and paralysis will ensue. So, the more players you have, analysis paralysis. Even with 2, there's a lot to do, which again is usually good, but the problem is just so many options that look equally profitable. And that's like that fine line the games, have to walk. If the next great move is obvious, too obvious, then the game is uninteresting. But if there are 10 moves that look good enough, and if you just analyze a little bit more, one of them will emerge as not just good but excellent, and 10 minutes later you're still analyzing, and you think if you just analyze 1 minute more, then the game also to me has a problem. It's just not super exciting precisely because of that. To me, the greatest games, they present me with 2, 3, 4 excellent options that stand out right away, and then the grueling. Here I have a sense that, again, there are 10, 15 possible moves, all look good enough. and somehow that reduces the interest for me. Mind you, it's fun when you're able to pull off a truly great move, and from time to time you can do that. You capture something, and because of what you capture, and then you use a game effect and spend an offering, then you form a great set, and you score a lot of points, etc., etc., etc. It's a game that has its moments, but in general, especially if you play with more than 2 people, has the problem that it feels chaotic, and it feels there's so much good stuff that you can do that somehow gameplay almost feels irrelevant. So it's a game that has its moments. Somehow gameplay feels a little bit blurry, just like the rulebook, a little too chaotic, and just all over the place to really grab me. Not a bad game, but not a great one either. And I guess this is my lukewarm mixed assessment of Baron Voodoo.